There's a conversation most people avoid having out loud, not because it's complicated, but because it's too clear. A man looks at a woman, and he wants sex, not connection first, not spirituality, not long-term vision, sex. And he can dress it up however he wants. He can call it love. He can call it chemistry. He can call it I really like her. But underneath all of that, his body is pulling him in one direction, and the woman knows it. She may smile. She may engage. She may enjoy his presence. But she's watching, because she's seen this before. She's seen the attention turn into expectation. She's seen the affection turn into pressure. She's seen the man who says you're different become the same man who leaves once he gets what he wants. So now she adjusts. She doesn't say it out loud, but her movement says it clearly. If you want access to me, what are you bringing with you? That might look like money. It might look like time. It might look like consistency, protection, provision, emotional stability. But make no mistake, she's not just receiving affection. She's evaluating risk. And now something subtle begins to happen. He starts performing. He listens more carefully. He touches more gently. He says the right things. He slows down just enough to get further in. But his core hasn't changed. He still wants sex. He's just learned how to get closer to it. And she feels it. Not always consciously. But something doesn't sit right. The words are good, but they don't land. The touch is soft, but it doesn't rest. The attention is there, but it feels like it's going somewhere. So she pulls back, not all the way, just enough to protect what matters. And this is where the shift happens. This is where love becomes transaction. He thinks if I do more, I'll get what I want. She thinks if I give too much, I'll lose again. So now he gives to get, she withholds, to protect, and both call it dating. And over time the bodies start to stack. People come into each other's lives, share moments, share beds, share words that sound like love, and then leave. Not because they're bad people, but because they never met each other in the first place. They met each other through pattern, through expectation, through fear, through need. So now we live in a world where men are chasing release, women are guarding access, and both are quietly disappointed. Men saying, I just want a woman who really wants me. Women saying, I just want a man who's real, and neither realizing. They're both still moving from the same place. So the question becomes, what happens? When a man is no longer seeking sex to regulate himself, what happens? When a woman is no longer guarding herself from being used, what happens when neither one is negotiating, and both are simply present? Because if that moment exists, then everything we thought we knew about sex, love, attraction, and relationships has to be re-examined. Today, we're not talking about techniques. We're not talking about roles. We're not talking about how to get someone. We're going deeper. We're looking at the structure underneath desire itself. Why men chase, why women guard, why relationships repeat, and what becomes possible when that entire pattern is seen clearly. So instead of trying to get somewhere, instead of trying to fix anything or become anything for each other, we can just walk. No pressure, no performance, no need to be anything other than what is already here. The same thing she's been asking, the same thing he's been asking. Can I be here without managing you? Can I be here without you needing something from me? That's how we enter this, not as teacher and student, not as right and wrong, but as two friends walking, seeing what reveals itself, gently, honestly, without rushing to conclusions, because what we're stepping into is not an idea to believe, it's something to see. So let's walk together as friends and discover what divine sex, and everything beneath it, has been waiting to show us. I'm Patrick Carradine, and this is Unified Theistic Naturalism, and this walk begins now. Divine sex from oscillation to communion. The end of transactional love abstract. There are moments when two people walk side by side, and something deeper than attraction begins to speak, not through words or promises, but through timing. On a quiet evening beneath city lights and the hum of movement, a man and a woman shared space in what appeared to be an ordinary encounter filled with laughter, touch, attention, and presence. Yet beneath the surface of such moments, something far more ancient is always unfolding. What appears as romance or desire is often the intersection of patterned movement and presence, of inherited behavior and the possibility of alignment. Scripture has long pointed toward this reality, though often misunderstood. When Jesus said, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect," the Greek word teleos did not mean flawless, but complete, mature, brought to its intended end. It described alignment, not moral superiority. Likewise, when it is written, "Ye shall receive power," the word dunamis refers not to domination or force, but to inherent capacity, ability expressed naturally in action. These were never distant spiritual promises, but descriptions of human alignment when presence governs movement. What if love, sex, desire, attraction, and even betrayal are not mysteries to be solved, but movements of timing to be seen clearly? What if what humanity calls intimacy is often nothing more than oscillation seeking relief, while something far deeper remains available yet unseen? This paper explores that possibility, revealing that what we commonly experience as sex is rarely communion, but rather regulation, compensation, and patterned response. Yet there exists another movement entirely, one in which the body does not chase, desire does not distort, and touch is not transactional. In that movement, two beings meet not in need, but in cadence. This is divine sex, not as performance or technique, but as perfect action emerging through presence. The walk. Where it all begins to understand this clearly, we must begin not with theory, but with observation. A man sees a woman, and immediately something activates within him. This activation is not chosen, not consciously constructed, and not moral in nature. It is a movement that arises through somogenic transmission, a patterned response embedded through generations of lived experience. His attention narrows, his body prepares, and his mind begins to organize itself toward her. He calls this attraction, yet structurally it is movement toward regulation, a response seeking to resolve internal tension through external engagement. The woman sees the man, and her response, though different in expression, arises from the same underlying mechanism. She is not merely observing him. She is measuring him through layers of inherited pattern. Safety, consistency, presence, and behavioral coherence are assessed instantly, not through deliberate thought, but through biological recognition shaped by experience across generations. What she calls intuition is, in structure, somogenic transmission, expressing itself, guiding her toward protection and stability. What emerges then is not two individuals freely choosing one another, but two patterned systems interacting. The man moves toward release, while the woman moves toward protection, and both interpret these movements as love. Beneath the surface of every early interaction lies this unspoken structure, shaping the trajectory before a single word is fully understood. The hidden contract within this interaction, an unspoken agreement, begins to form. The man, through his movement, is seeking access, physical, emotional, and sensory, believing that fulfillment lies in that union. The woman, through her movement, is seeking assurance, stability, consistency, and evidence that she will not be destabilized by his presence. These are rarely spoken directly, yet they govern behavior, tone, and decision-making from the outset. When these two movements meet without communion, the relationship quietly shifts into transaction. What appears as romance becomes exchange, what appears as connection becomes negotiation, and what appears as intimacy becomes conditional. He offers attention, affection, and pursuit. She offers openness, access, and response, but each is measuring, adjusting, and protecting based on prior pattern. Love in this state is no longer free. It is structured around the avoidance of past pain and the pursuit of present relief. Why sex becomes distortion within oscillation. Sex takes on a role far beyond physical expression. It becomes a means of regulation, a temporary resolution of internal pressure, a validation of worth, and an escape from the persistent noise of conditioned thought. For a moment, the internal oscillation quiets, and this silence is mistaken for connection. Yet because the underlying pattern has not been resolved, the quiet does not remain. The need returns, often stronger, accompanied by comparison, insecurity, and renewed seeking. This cycle creates the illusion that more intensity, more frequency, or better technique will resolve the issue, when in reality the structure itself remains unchanged. Sex, rather than being an expression of alignment, becomes a tool for managing misalignment. The body is used to compensate for what presence has not yet restored. Why guarding emerges for the woman, repeated exposure to inconsistency and betrayal reinforces a protective pattern. When affection leads to withdrawal, when attention leads to absence, and when intimacy leads to destabilization, the system adapts. Access becomes controlled, not out of malice, but out of recognition. Boundaries form not as philosophical decisions, but as biological responses to repeated outcomes. What may appear as resistance or calculation is, in truth, structural protection. The system has learned that unfiltered openness leads to harm, and so it introduces conditions to prevent repetition. This is not failure, it is adaptation. However, without communion, this adaptation becomes another form of oscillation, reinforcing separation rather than resolving it. The collapse into transaction as both individuals refine their responses, the interaction becomes more sophisticated but not more aligned. The man improves his presentation, learning to display attention, patience, and care in ways that increase access. The woman refines her filtering, becoming more selective, more observant, and more controlled in her openness, yet both remain within the same structural loop. The result is a relationship that appears improved on the surface, but remains governed by the same underlying dynamics. Connection becomes conditional, access becomes negotiated, and intimacy becomes measured. Transaction replaces communion, and the cycle continues, often across multiple relationships, reinforcing itself through somogenic transmission. The shift, when presence occupies center frame, what changes this structure is not effort, discipline, or strategy, but the restoration of presence. When center frame is no longer occupied by conditioned pattern, the need to regulate through another dissolves. The man is no longer seeking release, and the woman is no longer seeking protection, because neither is operating from lack. In this state, interaction is no longer driven by compensation. There is no need to extract, prove, or secure anything. Movement becomes direct, unforced, and timely. What emerges is not performance, but expression. Divine sex is not defined by duration, intensity, or technique, but by the absence of distortion. It is the natural expression of connection when no underlying need is driving the interaction. The body participates fully, the senses are engaged, and touch is present, yet nothing is being taken or exchanged. In this state, there is no attempt to complete oneself through another. There is no effort to secure validation, and no pressure to maintain an image. What remains is simple, direct, and whole. Two beings meet without division, and what unfolds is not transaction, but resonance. The end of transaction, when communion is present, the structures that once governed interaction fall away. Sex is no longer currency, attention is no longer leverage, and affection is no longer strategy. Because nothing is lacking, nothing needs to be exchanged. The interaction is no longer about outcome, but about presence. For the first time, the body is not used to stabilize identity, and the moment is not managed to produce a result. It is lived fully without residue, without negotiation, and without distortion. Scriptural fulfillment, revisited. When Scripture speaks of perfection as teleos, it points to completion, alignment, and wholeness, not moral achievement. When it speaks of power as dunamis, it refers to the natural expression of capacity without force. Divine sex is not separate from these ideas, but their embodiment within human interaction. It is what occurs when alignment is no longer conceptual but lived. Conclusion: humanity has long confused desire with love, sex with connection, and transaction with intimacy. As a result, relationships follow predictable cycles of attraction, attachment, and fracture, repeating across generations through somogenic transmission. These cycles are not mysterious. They are patterned. Yet what is patterned can be seen, and what is seen no longer governs in the same way. When communion is restored, desire loses its urgency, sex loses its distortion, and love loses its conditions. What remains is presence expressed through the body, without need, without exchange, and without fragmentation. This is divine sex, not something to achieve, but something revealed when oscillation ends and alignment returns. Reflective questions. 1. When I experience desire, is it arising from presence or from a need to regulate internal discomfort? 2. Do I approach connection to express what is already whole, or to receive what I believe is missing? 3. What relational patterns continue to repeat in my life, regardless of the person involved? For have I mistaken improved selection or behavior for true alignment? 5. When intimacy occurs, does it leave residue, or does it pass without internal disturbance? 6. What would connection look like if nothing needed to be exchanged, proven, or secured? 7. Am I willing to experience connection without using it to stabilize my identity? What a beautiful walk, to see clearly what has been driving us, to feel without distortion what we've been calling love, attraction, desire, and to recognize that beneath all of it, we were never chasing each other, we were seeking communion. What we called chemistry, what we called passion, what we called the one was always pointing to something deeper. A man in communion is not searching, not performing, not chasing relief. He stands in cadence, steady, present, unshaken, and in that he becomes what the woman has always felt should exist, not a fantasy, not a role, but a living alignment. The strength she feels, the safety she recognizes, the depth she responds to, is not something he is trying to give. It is what naturally flows when nothing in him is divided, and the same is true for her. A woman in communion is not controlling, not managing, not guarding from fear. She moves with precision, with softness that is not weakness, with presence that does not demand. She knows when to step forward and when to be still, not as strategy, but as alignment. What the man has been searching for, the peace, the acceptance, the freedom to exist without pressure, he experiences it in her, not because she is trying to be that, but because she is no longer in conflict within herself. And when both meet here, there is nothing to manage, nothing to prove, nothing to extract, nothing to protect. There is no need to look elsewhere, no need to replace, no need to repeat the cycle, because in communion, the movement that once drove endless seeking becomes still. There is no cheating in alignment, no comparison, no quiet search for something better, only presence shared. And in that presence, the attributes become visible: truth without distortion, observation without interference, perfect action without effort, movement without resistance, non-duality without division, compassion without condition, and love without demand. This is what we have been calling divine sex. Not an act, not performance, but the experience of communion expressed through two, and to see this is already to step out of the cycle. So if this walk resonated with you, and when you are ready, there are 3 doorways that open. Doorway 1, the day God never created sin, a return to origin, where suffering is no longer seen as failure, but as misalignment. This doorway reveals how what we have called sin is not something created, but something perceived through distance from presence, and how that distance dissolves when communion is restored. Doorway 2, the reward of oscillation. A life of distortion, a clear and honest look at the cycles we live in, how oscillation rewards us with just enough to continue, but never enough to complete. This doorway exposes the subtle patterns that keep us repeating relationships, emotions, and outcomes until they are finally seen. Doorway 3, beyond prayer. Living in communion with the divine, an invitation to move beyond seeking and into living. This doorway reveals what happens when the divine is no longer approached as distant, but recognized as present, where answers are not waited for, but lived in real time through communion. No matter which doorway you choose, I will meet you there. I'm Patrick Carradine, and this is Unified Theistic Naturalism.